Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at puremtgo.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 130 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Christian, and I'm joined by our co-host, Brad.
Hello, everybody.
Before we get too far into this episode, I just want to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by puremtgo.com. If you'd like to support the show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Common Knowledge YouTube channel, and check out our Patreon. That out of the way, let's get on with the podcast for the week.
Yay. How you doing, buddy?
Man, I'm doing great.
Are you surviving? Your weather's down there isn't a whole lot different than ours up here. I think you're just a little more wet, a little more humid down in Nashville way.
That's the thing, right? It's no one here really complains about how hot it is. They complain about how sticky it is.
It's not the heat, it's the humidity.
Yeah, but the weather's been fine. I personally enjoy weather around like this.
Yeah, I do too. I'm a big summer fan. I don't know about 100 plus degrees, but I don't mind hot weather at all.
For whatever reason, it might be like the more daylight hours or whatever, I just seem generally happier during this time.
I am too. I think I need sunshine in my life. Winter's always kind of rough, and I even like fall and spring, even though it's shorter daylight hours. But yeah, I definitely need that serotonin or melatonin or whatever it is the sun gives me. I need it all.
Earlier this week, this is actually the second time we recorded this podcast, so you already know all this.
Yes.
I had the alternator of my car go out, so that was like a fun thing to teach myself how to try and replace one of those.
But now you know.
Yep, absolutely. It's important skills to have.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know, the more you do it, at least for the cars that I have owned and or worked on, those sort of skills are transferable. An alternator is an alternator is an alternator.
Absolutely. You know, it's actually a lot like playing Magic, where, you know, with each car or each deck, you know, you have to learn something new, but you can take whatever experiences you have with like every other thing you ever worked on or whatever deck you've ever played with and apply those experiences to like this moment and find some sort of solution.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Whether you're used to playing aggro and then you pick up a control deck, there's always something new to learn, obviously there, but you can transfer some of those skills either direction, really. Absolutely.
Speaking of Magic, have you been playing any this past week?
I don't know if you stuck around the charity stream. Towards the end there, I was playing in a burn league and the client crashed pretty hard, like multiple times in a row, so I pretty much just ended the stream and did the giveaways and called it a night, but with everything going on this month, I just hadn't had a chance to get back in and finish that league. So I finished that up. It was burn. They gave me 3 matched losses to quote-unquote unknown opponents. So I went 1-1 of matches I actually played. I went 1-1. But I guess technically I ended 1-4 for the league, which isn't great, but I didn't play 3 matches. But I got my tickets reimbursed and all that good stuff, so it's not a huge deal. And then I played around in the tournament practice room with Heroic, still trying to figure out how people win consistently with that deck. And then when I got tired of that, I just sort of tinkered around with a mono-red land destruction deck that Owlex and I have been talking about for quite a while, actually. What about you? Any MTGO or cardboard play this week for you?
Pauper-wise, I've been playing a lot of Affinity. I played a few leagues with it. It felt really strong. Mostly just been playing blue-red lists, whatever I see on. I'm just going to take this, trust whoever it is, and if there's something that I think is like a glaring issue,
right,
deal with that. But oftentimes, you know, I'm fine just playing whatever somebody else tells me to.
Sure.
I've been playing that. Had a lot of success. It's really interesting because, and this is something that you and I sort of talked about earlier in the week, that Affinity right now is like a deck that I think is better than the vast majority of decks. And even the decks that I think are good against Affinity, I don't think they're that good against it. One of the matchups that I played a lot recently is Blue-Black Delver versus Affinity. And from what I understood, other people's opinions were that Blue-Black Delver was really favored. And I could be wrong. Maybe that's not the general consensus, but that's what I felt like people were saying.
Oh, yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. I think Blue-Black Delver, Blue-Black Fairies is definitely considered still tier 0 if we have a tier 0 pauper deck. If not, it's definitely tier 1, obviously.
But in my experience, certainly it feels like they might win more games than I do, but it's not like something super unwinnable, and it doesn't take like an active Urza or whatever for me to win. It's like if I play pretty tight and have decent draws, I feel confident that I'll win the match.
You're just going faster than they are, or you have just too many threats. The threat to their counterspell ratio is just too high. Or not even counterspell, but removal, snuff outs, echoing, this and that,
I don't know. I feel like you attack on so many different angles where it's like all of your stuff tends to be as cheap as their stuff. So, at most you're spending like 1 or 2 mana on stuff, and if it's like a really big threat, you might spend 3. And that's for your threats, right? So usually you're trading 1 mana for 1 mana, 2 mana for 2 mana. But then sometimes all of your good cards are free.
Right.
And then on the card advantage spectrum, certainly there are builds where they're paying like Frantic Inventory or whatever, but generally I think they just play like the cantrips.
Yeah.
And so they're spending 1 mana to scry to and draw a card versus you spending 1 mana to draw 2 cards that are free or whatever.
Yeah, 2 cards and put a 4/4 into play.
Mm-hmm. And then they also, whenever they play, have to respect the fact that you can just sometimes have this combo that can win.
Yeah.
And so I feel like both decks have a lot to think about in the matchup, but particularly I think your card advantage is a little bit better, and you're a little bit better on utilizing your mana than they are, and they have more stuff to think about. And so while I think that maybe they do have all the tools to beat you, if both players are playing really well, it's really, really close. And if there's a deck that is really good against all the other decks, and there's like 1 or 2 matchups that are really close and pilot dependent, I would just say that you should always play that deck. So I think,
okay.
Yeah, all of this was just me saying that I think of agreeing with everyone else that Affinity is pretty clearly the best deck, if not one of the best 2 decks.
Sure.
And then today I played some Storm, and that deck also seemed sort of nuts. I posted on Twitter that I was playing against some control deck, and I went off on turn 2, and then at the end of going off on turn 2, I got to play a Galvanic Relay that allowed me to set up for the next turn. So they answered me going off on turn 2.
That Galvanic Relay probably essentially set you up an entire new 7 cards or whatever, 10, however many, whatever your storm count was. That's pretty crazy.
So I made 10 squirrel tokens with haste, right? And those got answered.
Right.
And so then I got to use the rest of my mana to Galvanic Relay, flip over 11 cards, and do it again next turn.
Holy cow.
And so go off twice within the first 3 turns of the game. And it's like, that's really strong. And I don't know. I was very confused as to why those decks were playing Galvanic Relay. And I hadn't really played against the deck. For some reason, I just never seemed to run into it. But that, it's like, oh, this makes this deck so much more resilient.
Yeah, I mean, you cast a relay for a storm count of 6 or 7, or like you said, 10, you're essentially just starting the game over with a brand new hand of cards.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when Galvanic Relay got spoiled, and I thought it was awesome because we just don't have that sort of effect at Pauper, or we didn't have that effect at Pauper, but I wasn't sure exactly what sort of shell it would see play in. Do you think it's only good in this sort of storm turn 2, turn 3 win, or do you see it could fit into anything that really plays a lot of spells in that color?
One of the problems with it, I think, is that, you still have to pay mana for all the cards. And So why it fits well in the Storm is that a lot of your cards make mana or draw their cards, sometimes both.
Okay.
You really get to play all of the cards that you flip over, except the lands, generally speaking.
Which there's not a lot of those anyway.
I think it could have a home in maybe some sort of mono red deck that's kind of low to the ground, maybe like a mono red aggro, where maybe you play 2 creatures, play a burn spell, play a relay, and then you flip over 2 burn spells on a land.
Okay.
There could be use for it, but it's also usually those mono red decks are so tight on cards that I don't feel that that's better than just playing another threat.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, yeah, you can generally play it in any deck that has access to red, but I don't know of any other decks besides Squirrel Storm that's going to get you up to a storm count in the double digits, honestly.
Yep. Pretty much.
Now, do you think something like, because you're playing so fast with the possibility of multiple turns or multiple spells per turn, do you think Affinity would want to play that card?
My gut instinct says no, and the reason why is that the Affinity decks are so tight on the cards that they play. So, like, for example, I saw a list, I forget where I saw it, where, like, they wanted to play 4 Gear Seeker Serpents, so they cut Frog Mites, and it's like, that's a really tough decision to make, you know? Like, I couldn't imagine going, like, do I want to play Frog Mite, Gear Seeker Serpent, or some relays? Like, it just seems like it's really, really hard, and maybe it's trying to solve a problem that the deck doesn't really have, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes sense. I was just trying to jam it in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, you're right. I don't think it's hurting. I don't think Affinity's hurting for card advantage or card draw or anything of that nature. So,
did you find anything out about how people were winning with Heroic? I know that you said that you tried to see how other people did.
I don't really know. I think the 5-0s that show up are literally just a result of variance. That's my opinion. That's my experience. I know there are. I can't think of his MTGO screen name right now, but there is actually like a mono white heroic professional player out there. I believe he's Brazilian. He wins all the time with it. But like outside of maybe Burn, I've never played a deck that has such consistent mana troubles, regardless of how many lands you play. You're either screwed or you're flooded. And then find myself many times just with a handful of enchantments and no creatures, or I have to mull to 5 if I want to play at all, and those 5 have 1 land and no creatures. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very rough deck it's just not consistent, I guess. I love the deck. It's probably one of my favorite pauper decks. It's one of the first ones I ever built in paper, but I don't know. I can never seem to find a groove with it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mostly agree with the assessment. I think the deck is fun, but super inconsistent. And furthermore, it's like the consistency that you do get, it's hard to play with.
I think the first match I played Heroic with in the tournament practice room was a mirror. And I lost game 1, I won game 2, and then game 3, I had 2 or 3 creatures out. We both had our Trailblazers up to, 12 plus power and 20-something toughness. And we both had about the same amount of creatures on board. And then my opponent, I think on like turn 7 or 8, just went Death Blade, like right in a row. The next turn he swung, provoked all my creatures, and I just died.
That'll happen.
And it did, big time. It was glorious.
I guess we can get into our main topic. What was that this week?
Well, before the rolling DeSoto, Missouri blackout of Tuesday evening, we were going to talk about the 5.0 dump, the first 5.0 dump since Modern Horizons 2 was available digitally, but we're going to do the same thing, I think, but with the most recent 5.0 dump, see where the meta's kind of shaken out since then, and just see what the decks are looking like. And this came out Wednesday on the 16th, I believe, and we'll just kind of go through those. I don't know if we just want to gloss over them, pick out a few, go down the list, however you want to do it. But yeah, just kind of see what people are playing, what's 5-0ing at the moment, see if there's any, which I'm sure there is, but see what kind of Modern Horizons 2 cards have been popping up, and just see what's rolling out there, I guess.
Yeah, so the first thing that stood out to me just scrolling through the list here is that there appeared to be quite a few Storm decks. Like, it's especially weird, I think, for a 5.0 deck dump, where a deck like Storm that has to play so many cards is able to get multiple lists in.
Yeah, for those out there in radio land that aren't familiar with it, I think we touched on it last week before I lost power, but for a deck to be published on Wizards' site and then subsequently on Goldfish or wherever else they go, for a deck to be published with a 5.0 record for the week, it has to be, is it 10 or 15 cards different from the next closest deck?
I think it's 10, but I could be wrong.
So 10 cards different. So in something like this, you're never likely to see 2 different burn decks with a 5.0, in the 5.0 dump, because they're never going to be 10 cards different from one another. Same with Heroic and that sort of thing. And I think the point you were getting to is the Storm decks now, the Chatterstorm decks now, they have to play so many cards that it's hard to sort of fathom how they can be that different from each other and still be successfil.
Yeah, and just looking at it, the two, there's like a black-red, then of course green, but base black-red, just green for Chatterstorm.
Which pilot are you looking at?
I'm looking at Gabriel MTG's list,
Yep.
And this is sort of the ones that like I'm more used to seeing that are playing like Knight's Whisper, the Black Rituals, and stuff like that as sort of the real ways that they're trying to card advantage and go off. And then this one also has like Faithless Looting and Rite of Flame, and then like Sign in Blood as well. And they actually, interestingly, have 2 Shred Memory to tutor out Shatterstorm or any other combo piece.
Yeah, first day of class or what have you.
That was sort of like the first one that I saw that I felt more like knowledgeable about.
Mm-hmm.
But then I clicked on Jogando Palado's deck. I probably butchered that.
Congratulations, Gabrielle MTG. It was a good 5-0.
And I see where they differ. So this one looks more like almost like a blue-red Modern Storm deck.
Blue-red-green, Teamer, whatever you want to call it. Teamer Squirrels.
Like, obviously, it's playing a lot of cards that you can't in Modern Storm, but it's playing, like, Brainstorm and Ponder and Preordain and just, like, the blue cantrips, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's playing Desperate Ritual and Seething Songs and stuff like that. And its sideboard plan looks a lot like the Modern deck sideboard plans of pieces of the puzzle and stuff.
Yeah, it's so spicy.
The mana base is, like, a little bit worse, right? But, like, it's literally just, like, here's the Modern Storm deck with worse Storm cards and worse mana.
Mm-hmm.
But the plan is mostly the same. And it's like, there you go. Like, first couple of turns, cantrip till you're ready to have a big turn. And certainly there's no, like, deterministic loop here or anything that I can see. But I don't know if there has to be.
Yeah, speaking on the, I guess, the determinants of whether a deck is published or not, just looking at this Teamer Squirrel list that we're talking about, I think just the lands itself are different, are probably 10 cards different from the one we just looked at. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, because this one looks like it's geared more toward play island, cantrip, play island, cantrip, and maybe play mountain, try and go off at like 3 mana. You know what I mean? It doesn't look like it's trying to do the turn 1 or turn 2 win or whatever.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit more resilient, which is crazy because I was just telling you that I thought that the black, red, green deck was super resilient. So,
but yeah, it's a good looking deck. It's very much, I don't know, it looks cool. I have yet to play any Chatterstorm list, but I feel like if I were to brew a deck for some reason with Chatterstorm or net deck, it'd probably be something along the lines of Teamer. I like the blue potential in it. Yeah, you're right. It probably slows you down maybe a turn or 2, depending on your draws, but those are just the colors that I'm more comfortable playing in, at least as far as a combo deck goes, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I would be really interested in playing this list myself. But yeah, so those are sort of the decks that really caught my eye, were just the 2 Storm decks. I wasn't sure if there were any particular ones that caught your eye at maybe like you could see how this would be good at combating the current meta.
There are, let's see, one. It's interesting that there's 2 Blue-Black Delver lists on here. I haven't opened them up to see what the exact differences are. And then there's a Demir Fairies list as well. Oh, it looks like 3 Delver lists, 3 Blue-Black Delver lists. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, the one that really caught my eye, I was sitting here looking at during the pre-show, is from James B. It's about halfway down the list. It's Mono Green Infect. Hello.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. That's actually the one that I had pulled up because that was the one that I guessed you were going to say.
It definitely sticks out from the rest, that's for sure. You don't see Mono Green Infect very often.
It's interesting. Anyone that sort of knows me IRL knows that I like the concept of infect decks a fair bit. I think they're cool.
Yeah, same here. I feel like this one's a little heavier on the creature package, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, other than that, it looks pretty straightforward. It's got your Lotus Petals for getting those creatures and those pump spells out a turn earlier. Your Hunger of the Howl Packs, Mutagenic Growth, Vines of Vastwood, Apostle's Blessing, etc., etc.
Yeah, 16 creatures. I don't know if that's something that's normal for Pauper Infect.
This one has 20.
Well, so it's 16. So whenever I say 16 creatures, I meant 16 infect creatures. The Llanowar Augur is actually a pump spell.
Oh, yeah. I see. Okay. Yep, I see what you're saying.
Oh, no, that's no big deal. And then they have 2 more on the sideboard of Corpse Cur. I don't know. I couldn't think of why this would be a good choice against the other really good decks.
I don't really either. Maybe because I've seen Infect win, and heck, I've lost to Infect, Pauper Infect on turn 2 before. Maybe they just were expecting a lot of turn 2 or turn 3 Squirrel Storms and thought, Heck, I want to run my own turn 2, unless they just really like Infect, which is fine too. It's a sweet deck.
I'm not saying that they shouldn't have played it or whatever. It's just looking at it, I see some Storm hate in the sideboard of Weather the Storm, but that doesn't really do anything because your main game plan is attacking with creatures and they're going to have blockers for days.
I was kind of curious about the Corpse Cur in the sideboard. It's a 4-mana artifact creature with Infect, and it's a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target creature with Infect from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, so this card is it's really interesting because, it's really good against the heavy removal decks. So blue-black Delver, blue-red fairies, maybe, where, maybe you get a few creatures down and you hit them for some points of Infect, and eventually they're able to remove one of your creatures or two of your creatures, and you can play Corpse Cur, pick up another one, and basically for 4 mana, really probably 5 or 6 mana, you get 2 threats just off of this one card because you get 4 mana this threat and then get to pick another one up.
So if you're in something a little grindy or a little more removal heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I just saw that 4 CMC and it threw me off a little bit because it's not. I don't think that's where Infect wants to be, is paying 4 mana for something. But yeah, when you got to, you got to.
Exactly.
We only had 24 decks in this 5-0 dump. That's not to say there was only 24 decks that put up a 5-0 record this week or that past week. These are just the ones that were different. So I like it when it's in the high 20s, low 30s. That to me sort of signifies that people are testing out different decks. Brews are successful and the meta's wide open. Granted, there's like 18 different decks here, 18 to 20 different archetypes here. So that's pretty cool to see. And outside of maybe Heroic and Infect, and maybe Boggles, but yeah, they're all tier 1 lists, 1.5s. That's not something you normally see, or I would like to normally see in the leagues, but that's just kind of been, that's where we've been lately.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, I guess, because like a lot of the same decks here are showing up that maybe would have shown up in the past. Now it's a little bit harder for me to understand why those are here, I guess. Like, I feel like I have a strong read on the metagame, and that for some reason confuses me because, like, whenever I see a deck like Elves, or actually Elves is a pretty bad example, or like Jund, right?
I was just looking at that Jund list.
Yeah. In the old meta, I can understand why this deck would be super good. And it's not that this deck is bad or whatever, but it's like they're playing some Sojourner's Companions and the Bridges or whatever. But pretty much this is just like a standard Jund deck.
Yeah, they've adopted the Cleansing Wildfire, Geomancer's Gambit, ramp package, if you will, ramp strategy with the indestructible lands. But yeah, there's not a whole lot different. Yeah, they got the Salamander in there, the new Sojourner's Companion, but outside of that, it's just your classic Jund across all formats, good threats and early removal.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder if this like Cleansing Wildfire, Geomancer's Gambit package with, I see they're also playing like Galvanic Blast and stuff with these bridges. Mm-hmm. And it makes me wonder if, maybe people were a little bit too soon, myself included, at jumping on, there's only 3 viable strategies in Pauper right now.
Right.
Like, maybe there's a lot more viable strategies, and they just have to adopt these like new weird decks.
Sure.
And if that's the case, I don't think that would make this too different than the previous metagame, where it was like we had a bunch of different decks, but a lot of them had to adopt boarding parties and the dinosaur, to be competitive. Yeah. Whether that be Sultai, Jund, Land Destruction, or whatever. And so, if it shakes out that over the next couple of weeks, more decks like this do well and different color combinations and maybe different win cons and stuff like that, then maybe my tune on the meta will change a little bit, in that maybe I jump the gun on a little bit to declare the 3 best decks, because this is just like a retelling of the previous metagame. That's what, whenever I see Jund lists like this or whatever, I have trouble seeing how they could beat the other decks, but clearly they did it. And so if this is something that's proving to work, I will feel much more positive about the metagame, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to dig in. I think there is on Wizards' site, dig in to see what their matchups actually were, or maybe that's just in the challenges, I'm not sure. But that'd be interesting to know as well, kind of what they ran through to get to that 5-0. Yeah, just to see what they ran up against, honestly.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because my experience is that usually I'm not seeing a lot of Storm, but I am seeing a lot of Delver decks or Fairies decks and a lot of Affinity, and that's pretty much all I play against right now.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I just assume that that's the case for other people, but certainly sometimes like you hit the veteran variants where you don't play against those decks 5 times in a row.
Exactly. Or if you do, they get a couple tough draws in a row or a couple tough opening hands in a row, and you just go for it. I'm surprised you honestly didn't pick up on the bottom deck on this list from _Zodiac.
Oh, I just clicked on it, and now that I'm looking at it, I just assumed it was going to be another Delver deck that was just mislabeled. But looking at it,
that wouldn't be surprising from Goldfish. But yeah, that's why I opened it up too, because I thought, there's another blue-black, whatever, fairies or Delver list, and no, this is not that at all.
This is like a blue-black control serpentine curve pieces of the puzzle thing.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. Forbidden Alchemy, Echoing Decay's main board for those pesky squirrels. Your cantrip package, Brainstorms, Ponders, a full 4 Duress in the main board as well. It's either spicy or ballsy. I can't tell which one it is.
Yeah, I'm super pro Duress right now. This is actually something that I think previously this week, before all the power went out, you and I sort of touched on a little bit at how much I personally like Duress. Because I think if you play a turn 1 Duress, or even sometimes a turn 2 Duress, you can really mess with Chatterstorm's draws. And you can really take the card advantage away from Affinity, the Thoughtcast or whatever, so they can't keep going. You can hit the other fairies decks with it, take their key counterspell or whatever. So I really like that card right now.
Yeah, I do too. You mentioned the Chatterstorm and the Affinity. I don't know, like I said, I hadn't played Chatterstorm yet. I know Affinity can have some pretty rough mulligans. So if they get down, if they mull to 5, 6, or even 4 and thinking, okay, I got these 4, I got a Thoughtcast, I've got these lands, I can start gas, dropping gas on turn 2 or whatever, and then you hit them with a Duress, that's just about game over for them. I was looking at the sideboard of this blue-black Alchemy Curve deck. It's just as spicy. What are you seeing here? Grip of Amnesia. I don't know that I've ever seen this card published in a list before. It is 1 and a blue instant. Counter target spell unless its controller removes his or her graveyard from the game, and you draw a card.
So here's a question. This is good against the flashback red-white decks? What is this good against?
I don't honestly know, because those decks that focus on the graveyards or rely on the graveyard so heavily, maybe it's just my play style, but I would just let you counter the spell. Because if I'm relying that heavily on the graveyard, I'm probably not putting all my eggs in one card's basket, you know what I mean? If you counter one of my spells, I'm probably not going to necessarily lose the game. I'll just let you counter it so I can keep my lootings and my Rally the Peasants and Battle Screeches and Prismatic Strands and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and if that's the case, I think then you effectively turn this card into counterspell draw card, which is really good. And then, and maybe the mirror-esque sort of stuff where you want to take out some or a lot of your removal. Having a counter spell like this where you can counter something early with it, where, maybe you're going after a card that doesn't really matter, like a Preordain or whatever. And it's I want my Preordain to resolve, so I'll exile my graveyard and you draw a card. And then you're sweet, now your Gurmag Angler doesn't come down. I don't know, I could see why this card would be good. But yeah, they got a lot of spicy stuff. They have Recoil.
That's one of my favorite pauper cards for sure.
Return target permanent to its owner's hand, then that player discards a card.
This is what we had before we had Dinrova Horror. And then War of the Spark, specialty Obnixilus's Cruelty. It's a black and 2 for an instant. Target creature gets -5 and -5. If it would die, exile it. Just some interesting cards in the sideboard. A lot of one-ofs similar to the main deck, but it's just pretty neat. 2 annuls, counter target artifact or enchantment spell, Nihil Spellbomb, etc., etc.
And, Serpentine Curve is certainly good as a win con. I think this deck looks fun. I would play it.
I think it does too, yeah. Now I have an Is It version built in paper, but I definitely want to try out. I know when the blue-red version of the Serpentine Curve decks was real popular after Strixhaven released. That's what everybody was playing, was the Is It version, but there was kind of a parallel lesser crowd of people playing the blue-black versions that really liked it a lot, and I just haven't had a chance to play something similar to this yet, but I'd love to.
I think it looks cool again. I wasn't sure if there were any other decks in the deck dump. I think we touched on a lot of the more fun ones. Overall, I'm feeling more positive about this deck dump, I think, than the last one.
I did want to talk about one more deck. It's by Tink Master, who actually had 2 5-0s in this deck dump, so congratulations, Tink Master. It's the Jeskai or white, blue, red deck. It's not the Tron deck you 5-0'd with. This one is pretty interesting. It cares a lot about artifacts. It's got 2 copies of Stonehorn Dignitary in it, Mnemonic Wall, and Muldrifter. Those are all Tron classics. but there's not a single Tron land in the main deck or in the deck at all. I always think it's interesting when someone takes a big like control shell like that and runs it without the big mana.
Yeah, it's interesting because it looks like they sort of combined 2 or 3 ideas into one cohesive deck. For example, it looks like they're using the Tron Ephemerate strategy, and they added Chrome Courier, which is the 1/1 that whenever it enters battlefield, reveal the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. If you put an artifact card into your hand, you gain 3 life. So they're playing that, Stonehorn Dignitary, Mnemonic Wall, stuff like that with Ephemerates. And that is super cool. And they're playing the Cleansing Wildfire Rant package with the bridges, which is cool. And then they're also playing Galvanic Blast and stuff like that. You know, it's an idea that I saw floated online earlier this week, and you and I had actually talked some in the Discord about like a Jeskai Affinity deck that was really a control deck, the Affinity to play like Thoughtcast and Galvanic Blast and stuff. So it's really interesting that all of these ideas just sort of come together into one cohesive thing that I like a lot.
I'd be interested to see, or I am interested to see, if a deck like this sticks around or if it was just sort of took people by surprise. I like that he's using, or Tinkmaster, I like that they're using Chrome Courier as a way to find their artifact lands, because they don't have really any other artifacts in the main board other than the other 3 copies of Chrome Courier itself. So that's kind of neat, as well as they're running the Wildfire package for ramp. I just thought that was neat.
Really interesting, really creative way to build a deck, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of, I think, whenever we talk about brewing, one of the like tenets of brewing is that a way to be a successful brewer sometimes is to take an idea that you know is good and then take an idea that you like for the metagame.
Yeah. See if you can razor tide them or rust veil them.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you're right. Because, yeah, it's got, like you said, like you started out saying, they got the Ephemerate package. Each one, they only have 12 creatures, but every single one of them has a value ETB that can exploit Ephemerate.
I like that a lot. I think it's cool. I hope something like this is.
And a spicy 4 of Dust to Dust in the sideboard. Ooh.
3 mana, exile 2 target artifacts.
I think it first showed up in the Dark. 96-ish, 95, somewhere around there, 26 years ago. That is way not before my time. It's way after my time. But yeah, that was a pretty cool deck. Outside of that, we got one Tron list, possibly another Jund list, unless I'm looking at the same one, another Infinity list. So it's pretty standard after that. There's only one Skred list showed up. The same with Boros Monarch, only one showed up there. There's one Orzhov Pestilence list, which actually I looked at this one. And yeah, they're doing, they got the pretty standard creature package of Thraben Inspector and Skyfisher, Riftwatcher, et cetera, but then they're running a whole bunch of hand hate as well. They got main deck Duresses, Castigates, another Duress in the sideboard. Yeah, it's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a deck that I always lose to Pestilence, and I never...
I gotcha. Yeah, I'm like that with quite a few decks, actually. It's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I can see what they're doing when it's happening to me, but I can't make all the pieces work.
But yeah, no, I just wanted to point that one out and talk about it for a second. Black-white's my favorite color combo, and I just put together an Orzhov Pestilence list for the battle box, so I just haven't had a chance to break it out yet.
I look forward to one day learning how to play that deck.
I haven't bothered playing it on MTGO because I just haven't wanted to shell out the money for it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, I was feeling a little bit more positive about this deck dump than I think the last one that we tried to look at. I don't know, one of my issues, I think, with looking at the metagame is that I am mostly just echoing other people's sentiments in that I think that there are clear 2 or 3 best decks in Pauper, and I think that playing other decks doesn't have as much value to be expected returned to you. I really enjoy the new Affinity decks. I've always enjoyed Blue-Black Delver. Storm was fun earlier today. So, I don't know. I think that's a question about what do people want Pauper to be.
Yeah, I think that question has been brought up more since about halfway through the spoiler season of Modern Horizons 2. That question has been brought up more than all year, I think.
I think that no matter what the answer is, I personally will be okay just because of the way that I approach the format.
Yeah.
But I do know that there are a lot of people that really enjoy things that I don't on both ends of the spectrum. So I like seeing all the cool brews that can make 5-0s and sometimes pop in challenges, and I think everyone enjoys that to an extent. But I enjoy them enough to take them and play them and stuff like that. Whereas other people really want a defined tier 1 metagame that are clearly the best decks.
Yeah.
And then other people are on the way other end of that spectrum, where they may think that paupers should just be whatever commons you own. And I don't think that there's necessarily a wrong way to approach the format, but you can't have both forever.
No, it's really almost impossible to have both exist at the same time. Yep. And I think that question of what you want pauper to be, I don't really think it's a question that has an answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's more of a thought exercise or something you can theorize about, but I don't think you're going to get an answer from anybody, honestly. At least not a concrete answer. I don't think anyone out there that really plays pauper on the regular or semi-competitively or what have you. I don't think anyone actually has a definitive answer of what they want the format to be. And that's good and bad. I mean, I wasn't trying to say that in a negative way, but because I certainly don't. I don't know what I want it to be. I know what metas I like, and I know what cards I like, and this and that. But the grander picture of it all, the format itself, I don't think I personally have an answer for it.
A good piece of advice, I think, to everybody would just be sort of roll with the punches.
Yeah.
Unless there's a problem that gets out of hand. Currently, I don't think these 3 decks are out of hand just because of how new they are. I think if these 3 decks sort of stay the best 3 decks for the next couple of challenges, then maybe there's a problem that people should be going after and being like, hey, Wizards, please ban this.
Yeah.
But for now, I think it's fine to let stuff dominate and then see where the dust settles here in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good to me.
I guess if we're done with that, get on with the Q&A portion of the show. We got a lot of Q's and hopefully some A's.
Hopefully 1 or 2 answers.
First one comes actually from the email. Daniel J. wants to know, how do I create a playgroup and grow it to the point where we can have regular events?
That is an excellent question. And that's actually a question that comes up quite often. It's almost worth its own show topic, honestly, but I'll let you start.
I don't think I can cover this, definitely. I don't even think I can begin to scratch the surface. I will give you my best piece of advice on how to grow anything, and that's to just do it. For example, Brad and I want to grow the show. Well, the best way to do that, we learned, is to make the show, and then we'll refine the growing process from there, You want to grow your pauper playgroup, show up with 3 or 4 pauper decks, or maybe even just 2 that are evenly matched, and go, hey, do you want to play with this? To some random person. And if you want it to be a regular event thing, show up at the same time every week. It might take literal weeks.
Yep.
Eventually, people will go, I don't like losing to that card. Let's see what deck's that card. And then they bring their own deck, right? And then you have a playgroup of 3 or 4. And eventually, that will become a big thing. It's not like a maybe. Well, it definitely is a maybe, but I think it's very likely to happen so long as you just show up and you play, and you stick to it and you play. And you have to play for the fun of it. There's not going to be prize incentives probably the first couple of weeks because it's just going to be you and whatever poor sucker plays
right.
Blue-green infect versus mono-red or whatever. But eventually it's going to grow. Brad, I don't know if you have any other advice.
I think you pretty well nailed it. The only example I'll give based off what your answer was, and that was going to be my answer too, but my LGS here, we've had our pauper scene going for about 2 or 3 years total, if you count 2020 as a year. But before, and we probably get anywhere from 6 to 16 people show up every Saturday for pauper. It just depends on what's going on. From the story I heard, it was one guy that started it, and he showed up pretty much like you said. He showed up every Saturday evening with a pile of decks. I think he had 4 or 6 decks. He would invite people. He would grab people from the store that were there, customers, to play. And I want to say from what I heard, it took like 6 to 8 months before people started showing up with their own decks, and then they had enough people to run an event, and then they could start doing entry fees and giving prize support and that sort of thing. So it takes time, but it's well worth it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just like a general advice that I can give to people about anything, is that if you want something to happen, so long as you're not being a danger to anyone or yourself.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's but call back earlier in the show. It's like the car thing. You want your car fixed, learn how to fix it.
Sometimes you just have to do it.
And up next, got a question from friend of the show, Big B.
Big B wants to know, they would love to hear about any brews you are thinking about with all the new cards. I assume they mean from Modern Horizons 2. I honestly haven't brewed or theorized a lot with Modern Horizons 2 yet. I started to, and then Squirrels and Affinity was everywhere, and I sort of got distracted. But that last deck that we talked about, that Jeskai with the Courier Artifact Flying Deal Ephemerate deck that we talked about, the 5-0 list, that's probably something similar that I'd want to brew. I really like that card, that artifact card, when it came out, when it was spoiled. I don't think I have anything specifically in mind. It seemed like everything that I really like from Modern Horizons 2 is stuff that just goes into existing decks. Like the new Madness creatures, I'm going to try out in Tordex, and Galvanic Relay, I'm sure I'll try out in Blitz or something crazy. You know what I mean?
I definitely agree. This felt like a set that bolsters a lot of the decks that we have. Certainly, there are the packages that we talked about, the Galvanic Relay, Wildfire with your indestructible bridges, Certainly, that's like a new package that's going to pop up in a decks, but that's going to pop up in decks that already exist. And, I think that's fine. I think that's mostly what pauper sets are, truly, or any set with cards that hit pauper, is that usually we have, a defined metagame, and then these sort of slot into those decks, or new cards slot into those decks, and maybe have each deck have like a few different branches of ways that you can play it.
I'm right there with you.
Up next, Bandy wants to know, what decks do you think are best positioned to face the new Affinity list?
As an outsider looking in, because I'm not big into the challenges and stuff like that, best positioned, I currently, I don't think anything is in a great position to beat Affinity or to have a positive, consistent matchup against the new Affinity deck. Outside of, like we talked about earlier, Blue-Black Delver, Blue-Black Fairies, maybe. Outside of that, I'm not totally sure.
I would say Fairies decks that are leaning a little bit more into card advantage and cheaper spells. So, instead of just playing your 1-for-1 cantrips to keep up with Affinity, you might want to play like the 2 mana, draw 1, and then draw 2. I forget what those are called. Accumulated knowledge, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
You might want to play stuff like that. And then I really think having cheaper removal, or removal that hits multiple things, so Echoing Decay and Snuff Out, and then maybe some sort of hand hate, whether that be splashing white for Castigate or playing just the rest, which I recommend. I think tailoring a blue-black Delver deck to the matchup, and that's also maybe playing Delvers, that way you have more speed to keep Affinity on the back foot. That would be how I recommend attacking them.
Yeah. What do you think about, this card got brought up on Twitter, I ended up talking about it, or someone asked me about it. What do you think bringing in from your sideboard, if you're facing Affinity, what do you think about bringing in Echoing Ruin? It's another echoing card, but it destroys an artifact and all artifacts with the same name. And I think it's like one in a red for an instant or sorcery, but it's in that echoing cycle, Echoing Truth, Echoing Decay, it's Echoing Ruin, and it destroys all the same named artifacts.
I like it. I think you would have to justify to me why it may be better than some of the other artifacts hate. So, like, for example, like, that's really good, but when your competition is a card like Ancient Grudge, which certainly not all decks can play Ancient Grudge, but if it can, where you can destroy any 2 artifacts, like certainly sometimes they're going to have like 3 Mirror Enforcers or whatever, but they just have so many different good artifacts,
That's true.
And then, something that I like as well as Shattering Spree, I think, no, not Shattering Spree. What's it called? It's 2 mana, destroy target artifact, and then dredge 1.
Oh, Shenanigans.
Shenanigans, while slower, could be as strong as that card, but that's still definitely a strong option, specifically if you're trying to hit maybe when they're going off quickly.
I'm sure there's a reason it doesn't see play, and there's a reason it hasn't seen play yet, even with Affinity on the rise, but I was just kind of curious.
For what it's worth, maybe a reason that card hasn't seen play or isn't seeing play currently is because Pauper, compared to other formats, is still a really small player-based format, and sometimes stuff just doesn't get tested for a really long time. Like, we have a really creative player base, and we have a lot of people that play a lot to test a lot of stuff, but we're going to miss some things, so...
Once or twice a week, I find a card on Scryfall I've never heard of before, or I post a card on Twitter that someone's never heard of before. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it happens. There's almost 8,000 cards that are legal in Pauper. You can't remember them all. But yeah, next up, we got our buddy on Twitter and the Discord, Alex. He wants to know, what are our favorite keywords and or mechanics, and which one of these would you like to see some jank decks brewed around, and why is one of them Populate? I do enjoy Populate. We've had a lot more token strategies introduced in the last couple sets, so I think Populate could be stronger. I wouldn't mind copying a big fractal token or something like that, but I definitely like Populate. Dredge is one of my favorite ones, just not necessarily from a gameplay standpoint, but just what it is, what it does, where it comes from, where it fits in the grand scheme of things. I really like Dredge. It's kind of dirty and gross and nasty. Prowess and or lifelink are at the top of my list for sure.
Those are all fun answers. It's funny because I was going to say prowess.
Yeah, that's a good one.
To me, it's weird because prowess is like all across Magic, but we have a few good prowess creatures in Pauper, but we don't have like a prowess deck. You know what I mean? And I would love to see more.
I would too. I think Swift Spear is probably a little too good for Pauper, but it would have to be something like that for prowess to be an archetype in Pauper. We have a handful of them, maybe a dozen or so creatures with prowess on them, but they're starting at 3 CMC and going up from there. So they're not great. They're fun, but they're not great. I'm having trouble thinking of one off the top of my head, but I'm always, whether I'm sitting at work or driving to work or whatever, I always some mechanic comes into my head and I think, oh, what can I build around that specific keyword or mechanic or whatever.
Enter Esper Party.
Yes, exactly. Party. That's probably my favorite one currently. We'll see if it remains my favorite after Forgotten Realms.
Right.
Right now, it is Party. I love it.
Up next, Brazio MTG wants to know what we think about this ban list. Chatterstorm, Atog, Urza's Lands.
I would be fine if Chatterstorm is gone. I've seen a lot of people lately ask for an Atog ban. Is that just because Affinity is so fast now that Atog gets out of control on turn 3 or turn 2, or that one kind of, maybe because I don't play a lot of Affinity, asking for an Atog ban just sort of kind of came out of left field, so I'm not sure where that one's coming from.
Whenever they say Urza Lands, and Chatterstorm, I get the sense that a lot of Pauper players and a lot of players of Magic generally don't like the concept of cheating mana. So, for example, Chatterstorm decks or Storm decks, so they're going to get a lot of mana super quickly and expend it all right then. Urza's Lands, we all know how those cheat mana. And that's why the Atog here sort of confuses me, because I don't think it hits the heart of people's problem with Affinity. Like, I think it feels bad to lose to a Tog Fling, but I think the problem with the Affinity decks is ultimately that you're getting 4/4s for free and you're drawing 2 cards for 1 mana and you're making 5/6s for 2 mana. And every time you play one of these things, you have the option of making a 1/1 Thopter if you choose to play a 3 mana card in your deck.
How absurd is that?
Yeah, and so it seems like with the other 2 bans, you've identified a clear problem of you don't like fast or big mana in your format, or rather you don't like cheating mana that's undeserved in like a super quick way.
Right.
So if that was the case, I would prefer to see maybe like just ban Mirror Enforcer or whatever out of Affinity to give them less consistency. The problem is, though, is I actually think you have to ban 2 things out of Affinity to really knock it out, just because of how many options they have. Like I said, there's been lists recently that are cutting Frog Bites for the Gearseeker Serpent. So I don't know. Affinity's like a really hard deck to figure out what to ban.
I mean, you can't rightly ban 10 new lands that just showed up in the format.
Something that you could do, but I think this would just kill the deck. And I don't think that that's necessarily what I want, is ban the old Affinity lands and go, well, you have these tapped lands, so you're going to be losing a lot of speed, but you still get all of your new toys.
And then that falls into the argument of All the original artifact land cycles died for card X's sins. You know what I mean? You'd end up taking all those artifact lands away from Boros and the Jeskai decks and this and that because Atog or whoever was too powerful. Yeah, you're right. Affinity is very tricky. I don't know what you would hit out of there because it was always a good deck. It's always kind of a pillar of the format. Tier 1.5 to 2 on the regular, but in the last couple of weeks it has just skyrocketed to the top, and I don't think it's the Salamander's fault, and I don't think it's Ethereum Sculptor's fault, and I don't think it's the 10 dual tapped artifact lands fault, but I do think it's all of their faults, if that makes sense.
They have the storm list or whatever of how likely are these mechanics likely to going to show up in future standard sets.
Right.
And I don't know how high Affinity is, but from playing with and against it, I could see why it would be very high on that list of this will never show up again in a standard legal set.
Sure. It's busted. It's everything you said. It's free. It's just free spells. Free spells are broken.
Yeah, and there's a way to do it. So you could make a 3-mana scry 1, draw 1 with Affinity, right? Where it's 1 mana scry 1, draw 1. But when it's 1 mana draw 2, and I'm likely going to be drawing cheaper free spells.
Or cast this 4/4 for free. Oh, and while you're at it, you get another 1/1 flying artifact creature that adds to your free mana that you're already getting. It just snowballs. It's crazy.
Yeah, I can't really think of too many more ways to say it. I think Chatterstorm and Urza's Lands, while I don't like banning Urza's Lands, I could see why somebody would want to, and I wouldn't be against it. Chatterstorm, I think I like as a ban, but maybe not. See, I would like to see what Chatterstorm does in a meta without everybody playing Affinity. And so, to me, it's I almost want to, stagger the bans. You know what I mean? To me, I think ultimate solution would be ban every card with the keyword Affinity on it for a month.
Just see what happens.
And then ban every card with the keyword Storm on it for a month. And see how both of the metas shake out.
They could bring in suspensions to pauper.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that they don't even suspend cards in Historic anymore. That's a meme going around Twitter right now. But that would be something that I would actually be very pro in pauper. Just because whenever these powered sets, is what I call them, hit pauper, stuff gets shaken up so much, and it's so hard to figure out what the actual problem is usually.
Modern Horizons added to an already strong deck and created a brand new strong deck. I don't really want to go too far into the Urza's Lands ban potential. Give me 5 seconds. My whole stance on it is I'm okay with Fairtron. I'm okay with the lands being in the format. I think the problem is our flicker effects, Ephemerate, Ghostly Flicker specifically, and that's where I stand on it. I'm fine. Big monster, big beater Tron. I don't care. Big spell, Fireball, Caravax Torch Tron. That's fine. I don't care. Mono green Tron. Bring it on. It's the flickers that bother me the most.
I understand. Well, I guess we can move on to our last question. Comes from Eddie Boy 83. Paraphrase version of it would be, who would be our choices for a 5-person pauper advisory group like Commander has?
I'm not super familiar with the CAG, as they call it, the CAG, the Commander Advisory Group, but they're pretty much the ones that decide bans, right?
Yeah, so from what I understand, they decide what's banned in Commander, and maybe special rules changes for Commander or something like that. And from what I understand, they also have a group that sort of works under them that tells them what they experience, content creators.
Well, obviously, we would be 2 of them. I mean, we've got to be.
If I could pick my perfect 5, it would be 2 of me, 2 of you, and then maybe Alexander Weber as
that's great.
The 5th tiebreaker guy.
I don't see a problem there at all.
So that's going to be my official on-the-record answer on this. Truthfully, I don't think I would ever advise this ever happen. I know that sort of defeats the spirit of the question, but I see what people on the Commander Advisory groups or whatever it's called go through, and I think that is just a very poor way of doing things just for the sake of the people in the thing, all the harassment that they get on the internet and stuff.
Oh my God, it's brutal. I don't know how they.
I don't think that's something that individual people deserve.
Yeah.
But I would happily take all 5 slots and just become pauper overlord, because I think I could stomach the hate if I had that power.
I could see you doing it, sitting up on your throne. Yeah.
Exactly. I guess that's going to do it for this week's episode of Common Knowledge.
Yeah, that's a good one.
If you want to get in touch with us, you can find me on Twitter at JessGuyDad. Brad, where can they find you?
At pauper_B on Twitter or BradDrackV on MTGO.
You can find us both at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. If you have any questions on the pauper format, MTGO, or anything else, please email us or leave a comment down below. Thanks again to our sponsor, PureMTGO.com, as well as the Constructed Criticism Network for letting us be a part of it. And last, but certainly not least, thank you for listening. Take very good care of each other.
And never stop trying to beat Affinity.